Hey everybody, welcome back. In this episode, we're going to continue with our Express server and start building some new routes. Because so far we've just built the basic Express as you see here. I've built a data server here, Express server. It's feeding up a fake array of movies. I have a get request to / movies that sends this array of movies. Each have a title and a genre. And then I have my server listening on my localhost port 9000. Over on Postman, I can go do a get request to / movies. And I go ahead and see them all come in here. Great. So the focus of this video is how do we add a new movie to this database? I would like to add a 5th movie to this array of objects. Well, if you're thinking post request, you're right. But there's a little bit we need to do to set this up. So let's start off by building the route. We're going to run into an issue, and then we're going to talk a little bit about, hey, some more vocabulary. I know I said that we're pretty much done with that, but I lied. There's more. So let's learn it. Okay, so let's build our post request. We'll say server listen for post requests to / movies. You will receive the request and the response objects in a callback function, and then you can do whatever you'd like in here, and as long as you end up with sending a response back to the client. All right. Well, when we send a post request, how do we get that data to the user? If you recall on the front end, if we're in Axios, we send it as the second argument. If we're in Postman, we need to change our request type to post, and then we need to go to something called body and send some raw JSON. So make sure you have all these settings here. You're on body, you raw JSON. This is the send window. This is what I'm sending in my request. This is the response window down here. So request window, response window. All right, and I need to craft a new object. So let's craft a new object. We'll say the title is Bambi 3, Bambi's Revenge. All right, still like to see that. And genre, we'll say is fantasy. All right, I'd like to send this to my server and receive it. How do I receive it though? I'm on the back end now, I'm catching this request. How does the user get their request body to me? Well, funny enough, it is not done by default. There's a little configuration we need to do in our server to tell it to expect bodies and requests. So we're going to have a whole lesson on middleware very shortly in the coming lessons. But this is our first example of it. So here's some vocab. Middleware. Basically in Express everything is middleware, but what middleware is, it's a function that fires on the in-between, meaning it's one of the functions that fires in a set of actions depending on the request you make. So if I make a get request, it's going to hit my get route. It's not going to hit my post route or my put route. In that instance, that get route, what we have here, is an example of a middleware, something that fires on the in-between before the response goes out. Well, we can set up middleware that fire on every request. It's a function that fires before it gets to our routes, and the one that we need is one that intercepts request bodies. What this will do, it will check the incoming request for a request body, something the user's sending in the body of their request, and it will parse it into JSON for us so we can handle it. Parse it from JSON to JavaScript so we can handle it. So the request body middleware we need is one called Express JSON, and it comes in the Express package now, so we don't need to install anything else. We just need to tell our server to use it. So, being sensible creators, the Express developers were, they created a method called .use, telling our server to use something. This takes 2 arguments. It can take a mount path, so there's the first argument. What endpoint should this be listening for? And the second argument is, what is the middleware I should be using? Well, we can pass in a callback function and configure it ourselves, or we can just give it a function that it calls. So the function we're going to give it is one called express.json, and we're going to call it. And what this is saying right here is if a request comes to /, call this function and look for a request body. So what this middleware does is anytime a request comes to /, it'll fire this express.json function. And what it does is it looks for a request body, just like the one we're sending here in Postman in our request, and parses it. It takes the JSON, turns it into JavaScript, and puts it in rec.body. So down here in our routes where we have this rec and res object, the request and response, we can now have a rec.body, which will be the object the user sent in their post request or their put request. Now we don't want this to fire only on /. We want it to fire on every request. So this first argument's actually optional, and we can get rid of it. And now this is a middleware that fires on every single request that comes in. If a request comes in, this will fire. It'll look for a request body. If it finds it, it'll put it in rec.body. All right, so let's test this out. We're going to, in our post request, console.log req. Just see what that request object looks like. I'm going to open this console here, and we will send a post request. All right, so I send the request here. Notice my response window is pending because my endpoint isn't sending a response, so it's going to time out eventually. But over here in our console, we can see what Express consoled. And notice how large the rec body or the request object is. It's a very large object full of lots of things. But down here at the very bottom is what we're looking for. Body. So rec.body, there we go. There is my Bambi's Revenge movie. So I successfully received it from the client's request. So what do I need to do with that? Well, I need to add the request body to this array, and then a common thing to do is to send back that movie, letting them know it's been updated. So I'm going to just use a JavaScript method here on arrays. I'm going to say movies.push rec.body, which is our movie. And actually, to see this even better, we don't need to do this step, but this may help you when you're learning. We can say const new movie equals the request body, and then we'll push in the new movie, just so we can clearly see what rec.body is. Now to make sure our server ends its process and sends a response, we will res.send a message in this case. We could send whatever we want, but let's send a message. I think that's nice. We will say successfully added new movie.title to the database. All right, let's see how this works. So we'll come back here. Notice my response never came in, but now it should. I'll send my post, and it says successfully added Bambi 3 Bambi's Revenge to the database. Great. Okay, so this whole route worked, but how do we know for sure this array was updated? Well, we have our get request route, so let's switch to that now and send a get request to movies. And here we are, Die Hard, Star Wars, Lion King, Friday the 13th, and Bambi 3 Bambi's Revenge. Perfect. So it was added. Now keep in mind, we are working with fake data, so we're not really building a real API here. We're just doing static methods to learn endpoints and how to interact. And one downside of that is if I type anything and my server restarts, if I go do a get request now, my data is back to where it was before because my server reset. And this is just something we're going to deal with while we're learning servers. It's not a big deal. Later on, we will learn how to swap this out for actual endpoints or actual API code using Mongoose and MongoDB, and then it will be permanent. But here we got it. We got our post request to /movies. Express JSON receives the request. It finds the body and creates rec.body. It parses it from JSON to JavaScript and places it in this object so we can receive it, add it to our database, and then send a nice message to the client letting them know their operation was performed. Great. So definitely give yourself a little practice with this. Go ahead and make your own fake database, movies, or whatever you'd like to do. Create a get request, create a post request, and make sure you're testing this in Postman to make sure they all work. Once you've got that down, let's move on to the next video.